a Canadian radio sanctuary podcast.
A number of years ago, when you were a little bit younger, you did a show called After Four. This is going back with John Bassett. Was that your first experience as far as being on television?
Yes, it was. I was about 16 or 17, I guess, and the Telegram decided that they could see the demographics of what was happening with the baby boom, and decided first of all to do a newspaper that was geared entirely to teenagers, and then within a couple of months decided to start a television show. And so, knowing absolutely nothing about television, I started doing a television show. I did it during high school and also university.
Now, were you not the first woman to co-host on Canada AM?
Yes, I started Canada AM. I was also the first woman host of W5. They had only groups of men before, and they felt that they were being very daring to put a woman there. But I also started Canada AM, yeah.
Is there any area that you stayed away from as far as the kind of interview? Did you ever get into the adversarial type of interview, or did you do everything?
I did everything. The one thing I tried not to do were interviews that were labeled female. I struggled very hard from the beginning not to be put in the box of having to do cooking interviews or fashion interviews, because that was all that women were technically allowed to do at that time. So from the very beginning I refused to do that, and said that if there's a war, I have just as much right to cover the war as anyone else, and in fact was the first woman they sent to cover a war. And other than that, I did every kind of interview, some soft, some hard, depending on the situation and what I sensed the right journalistic approach was.
Is it a bit of a myth to assume that the hard interview is the more difficult one to research for and prepare for and to do?
Well, the hard one's often the easiest, because you don't necessarily have to have your facts down, or you don't necessarily have to be listening. You just hammer away. I guess what concerns me out of journalism schools is that I can spot a journalism student a mile away because they ask a nasty question. They think that's the height of journalistic expertise or integrity or courage, and it's not. It's just young. And as you get more experience and more knowledge, you realize that to get to where you're trying to get as a journalist, which is to find out a true situation or to identify solutions or identify problems, there are often better and more sophisticated ways of doing it. But the easy way is just to hammer out something nasty.
Did you ever get to the point where you felt, in retrospect, after you had done the interview, that perhaps you were a little too aggressive?
I can't think of an interview that I had that sort of regret about. There are often times that afterwards you think, oh, why didn't I think of such and such a question, or why hadn't I researched that a little bit better and gone after that. But I can't think of one. There's the odd one that you feel sort of badly about. I did a lot of work on an Air Canada interview some years ago, and we were getting the brown envelopes of mysterious evidence, and it was quite clear that some bad things were going on with Eve Pratt, who was the head of Air Canada. And I researched that top to bottom, and I did it really carefully. And it was rather interesting because he said that he wouldn't do the show, I was doing W5, unless I came over to Montreal the week before and spoke to him. So I thought, all right. So I went and I talked to him, and of course he was being very flattering, and here was a good-looking woman, and he was playing that role. I thought, fine. If he wants to take that approach, fine. We did the interview live, and I don't think I've ever been as prepared for anything as I was for that one. I knew the numbers backwards and forwards, I knew the budget, I knew the books, I knew everything. And so we started off, and he was clearly thinking I was just going to be some soft, easy mark. And I just went down the numbers. This happened, you said this, you did this. And by the end of the show, it was quite clear he was going to have to resign. And in fact, within a week, resigned. I feel badly in a sense that it happened, I guess, but it was accurate. It was correct. I didn't badger him. I wasn't nasty to him. I just quietly would cite a fact and say, this is what happened, this is what happened. You do have sympathy, of course, when someone's in a difficult situation.
Now, as far as someone who is an experienced interviewee, an experienced guest, being almost overly prepared, have you been in a situation where you've interviewed someone and they were ready for you?
Oh, people are often ready for you, but I think my approach has always been different from most people. I do an enormous amount of research and really know my story well, but then I listen. And I rarely use questions during an interview. I do all the work, and I will sort of jot out a storyline that I'm basically going to follow, but then I put it away and never use it. It's in my head, and I listen. And that often takes me in an entirely different direction. And because your cues come from that, and yet very rarely do people listen. And so they go immediately to their next question. Even if the guy has just implied that he's about to commit suicide, they don't hear the clue, and so they miss the real story. And they go down their list, and it's very mundane. But, yeah, you get people who know in advance exactly what they're going to tell you, and they don't tell you anything else, and that's it.
When you were elected to city council, suddenly tables turned and you were being interviewed. Was there anything you had to consider as far as preparation for that, or did you just let it roll and take it as it came?
I didn't think about it in terms of preparation at all.
So if there's a certain issue, though, of course you have to read up and be up on a certain issue that's happening at the time, especially if you're on that committee, for example. So you're going to be well versed in that and prepared in that sense.
Yeah, when I say I did no preparation, I mean I did no preparation in terms of thinking about how I would answer questions. I do as much research in my work now as I always have done, so I know my subject backwards and forwards. And whether I'm being interviewed about it or whether it's a citizen phoning for information or to try and understand something, I give exactly the same response. But the answer is to know what you're talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I say it. I will often say to a reporter, I don't know the answer to that. I can find out, but I don't know it. There is no point in trying to fake it. I mean, it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the reporter. It certainly doesn't solve any problems. So I'm not afraid ever to say, gosh, I hadn't thought about that, or I don't know the answer to that.
Would it be fair to say that a lot of people who might prepare to be the interviewee might be those who are trying to be evasive and they're looking for ways that they can get around hard questions?
Without question, if you're nervous about something and you want to hide something, then you know, you set up your answer and you stick to your answer. I hope I'm never in that situation.
You're used to microphones and cameras. What's it like, though, being on the other receiving end of it?
What I don't like is when I'm interviewed by people who haven't really done their homework. Because then I want to say, the question you should be asking is, and then answer the question. And in fact, someone accused me of doing that, and I know I do it from time to time, because they haven't done their homework and they don't know what the issue is, and so I'm trying to gently lead them along and tell them this is really what the story is here, and this is what's happened. It makes me angry, though, when people figure it's not worth their time to really do their work or their homework and just come in and say, well, what's this all about? Well, they should know before they ask the question what it's all about. Then they should know what they're trying to get out of it and where they're trying to go with it.
How does it compare being a politician as being a broadcaster? Let me add to that. Both are in the public eye, but it is different.
I find that the work I like. I find the work is very similar to what I did in journalism. You have a problem that comes along, whether it's vicious dogs and I'm doing it as a reporter, or whether it's vicious dogs and I'm trying to solve it as a politician. You look at what every other city has done, you speak to as many experts as you can, you get your facts together, you decide on a solution, and then you present it. So I find the work almost identical to what I did in journalism. The part I hate about politics, without question, is the political crap. I am no good at political games. I have no tolerance for people who play for headlines or the cameras and aren't really interested in solutions. And therefore, I suspect that doesn't make me a very good politician, because I can't stand it. I mean, I can't stand it. So I hate that part of the political life. I like the work itself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.